We're now at the home of my Aunt Matt Thomas. She's my father's youngest sister. She's 85 years old, and she has had a lot of experiences through her lifetime, and she's going to tell us about them. Aunt Matt, you want to begin when you first came into this world?
Well, I was born near Muddy Fork Creek in Trigg County in 1893, and I lived there until I was 5 years old. And when I left, we was left in a wagon drawn by 2 mules, and of course, my daddy was a tenant, and he moved from place to place. And he finally, when I was, I don't remember just what age, but anyway, he went to work my sister's farm. Is that all right?
Yes.
And we lived there until I was 19. And of course, while living there, we had a big orchard, and of course, I'd get out and pick up apples of a morning, and early before the chickens came out of the hen house, and I'd take me a little rest and sleep on the side of the tree while I was resting, picking up my apples. And of course, my daddy would make cider out of those apples, and my mother would cut and dry a lot to sell some, and then we used a lot of them. And then when I was 19, we moved from there to the county farm. And my daddy was the caretaker there at the county farm.
Hey, Matt, you want to tell us what a county farm is?
Well, it's a place for old people that don't have an income, and the county has to support them. And my daddy would see that they got their food from town, and
he was the general caretaker and general supplier of their needs.
And of course, would see that they had plenty to eat and plenty to coal and to keep them warm. But the county was furnishing all of that.
Yes.
But then we lived there a year, and we moved back then to my sister's home, where I had lived so many years. And then I lived there until we moved back there Christmas of 1913. And in January the 31st of 1914, I married and Star Thomas. And we came then to live in this house that I'm living in now. Moved here 8 days after I married.
And this house you're living in now is rather old, isn't it?
It's 111 years old.
And it's a large two-story frame house.
Mm-hmm.
No part of it's log.
No, but we've done a lot of repairing on it since we moved here. Of course, it was in bad shape at that time. It was originally owned by Alf Thomas.
You'd say you've modernized it, really, wouldn't you?
Probably, you might say that, yes. But anyway, it's comfortable, and we have gas heat, and we've had it.
You have water and bathrooms and all that.
Mm-hmm, and a bathroom, which we didn't have for a long time after we came here. But my husband passed away then in 1952, and we had a son. And well, our son, Charles Edward Thomas, lived with me until me and my boy both lived here until he married in 1955. And now he has a daughter, and they have lived with me.
You all continue to live here?
Live here together, yes, and they're still. Of course, our granddaughter's away in college, but he and Charles and his wife still live here with me.
What does his wife do?
His wife works at the health center at Katy.
Trigg County Health Center.
Trigg County Health Center. Mm-hmm. And just tell about that. Though.
You were speaking about your first radio.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember so well. We were the only ones in the neighborhood that had a radio at that time, and of course we'd play songs and the news over the telephone for the neighbors to hear.
Over a party line.
Over a party line, yes. And of course that was something new to everybody then, real new. I mean, kind of new to a lot of folks then.
Did you use those earphones then that I can remember when the first...
I didn't use them here, but I had a neighbor that we used them. We'd go to the neighbor's house and use the earphones.
First radio I remember listening to was at this neighbor's house, and we all took turns wearing the earphones and listening.
We did too. That is Mr. Ed Spurlock.
Yeah.
But when we got our first radio, we didn't. It was.
You didn't have to have earphones.
We didn't have to have the earphones at that time. And then we got our first television in 1953, and of course we were the second family in the neighborhood to have a television. John Bridges at that time was the only one around here that had a television.
So you were kind of modern, you
And
think,
then,
then.
of course, we had a lot of neighbors would come in and to watch television with us. And, of course, we were glad for them all to come, and we really enjoyed it.
Now, that was black and white one, I guess.
Black and white, yes.
And then the years passed, and you got a
After
colored one?
Charles Edward married, then we got the colored one. I can't remember just what year, but it's been 10 or 12 years ago, I'm sure.
Each one is an improvement over the one before, isn't it?
So much, yes.
Hey, Matt, do you remember anything about some of those early Christmases and what Santa Claus brought you and so forth?
Well, among my first Christmas that I remember, we didn't get very much for Christmas at that time because if we got candy and orange and apples, that was really a treat. And then among my first presents, I remember one Christmas got a little cup and saucer that I was really proud of that. And then I finally would get these China dolls, didn't have any hair, just the heads were China.
Yes.
And finally then, my last doll, I still have it. It was in 1904. It had hair and joints, and I was proud of that, of course.
And did she have eyes so she could go to sleep?
Yes, she could go to sleep, and my sister made its first dress, and I still have that dress on that same doll now.
Well, that's nice.
Now you asked me that. Christmas times, my mother always had coconut cake for Christmas as one of our specialties. And of course we all had lots of food. And
did you grate your own coconut?
yes, we would buy the coconut and break it and then grate it by hand.
Drink the liquid out of it.
That's right. And of course we always had chicken and dressing for Christmas and country ham.
Did you have a lot of extra company?
Yes, we always did. My mother and Daddy was always enjoyed company, and we had lots of young company as well as old. And
Well, what about your clothes? Do you remember anything particular about the clothes you wore at that time?
well, yes, we didn't have very many clothes. I usually got two dresses in the spring and two in the fall. Most of them was calico or muslin.
Yes.
And
Did you wear woolens in the winter?
Yeah, no, we wore the cotton union suits. Come down to my
For your
ankles.
underwear?
Yes, and we had then outing petticoats. They were with our long handle underwear.
Did your petticoat go from your shoulders down or just
Yes.
from your waist down?
No, from my shoulders down.
Well, I know some people talk about wearing Balmorals and corset covers and things like that. I didn't know if you
No,
did that.
this was made just from my shoulders down. We had this long handle underwear, we called them. Of course, they went down to my ankles.
Well, wearing that knit underwear from your shoulder to your ankles and your cotton petticoats
To
from
my
your
knees.
shoulder to your knees, you ought to keep warm all
Yeah,
right.
but of course our houses weren't warm at that time like they are now.
You probably slept in a cold room.
Slept, yes, we didn't have anything except wood heat at that time.
I started to say you must have burned wood
We
back.
did, just great big logs would burn in the fireplace, and of course sometimes our bedroom didn't have the heat in it.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about your school days.
Well, I went to school at Oak Grove, and the first year was in 1900 that I went to school, and Mr. L.B. Castile was my first teacher.
Tell us about the school at Oak Grove. What kind of school was it?
Well, it was
A
all grades,
one-room
school, and of course one teacher taught all the pupils. And
And who was your teacher?
Mr. L.B. Castile was my first teacher, and of course, and later on, Mr. Earl Cunningham was one of my teachers, and Miss Annie Patterson was one, and Miss Anna Cruz was one, and Mrs. Inez Thomas was one. And of course, I have been a member. The schoolhouse was near the Old Grove Church, where I have been a member since I was 12 years old.
You said you were a member of Oak Grove
Oh
Church.
yes, and I joined when I was 12 years old, and of course I have been a member there all these years. And of course, when I was young, the young people just had an organ at church, a church organ at that time, and the young people would gather around that organ and sing. And Lily Thomas was one of the organists, and Matt.
That's my mother and her sister.
Where some of the organs, then Lena Humphreys finally.
Their other younger sister.
Finally played, yes. Of course, we have played many songs, but Lily of the Valley was always one of my favorites. And now
Who led the singing when you were young?
I guess the organist did. the best I remember.
And Mama or her sister ain't met one usually played till
And then Lena, as she grew up
later.
she played.
She was about your age.
Yes, Lena was. I'm 13 days older than Lena. I can first remember the way we had of going places was in a wagon drawn by 2 mules, and my daddy finally bought him a buggy then. But first, though, when we rode in that wagon, my mother and Daddy would ride on the spring seat, and they'd put hay in the back of the wagon and a quilt on it, and we children would sit on that. And then, of course, we couldn't go very far from home at that time in a wagon. But then my daddy finally bought him a buggy, but it would drive a mule or horse to that. And then when
was that after the older children were all married and gone?
Yeah,
you were older?
Just Yul and me and Nola was at home
at
that time that I can remember.
Yes.
And then before we married, Stark and me married, he had a no-top buggy, and what you'd call a sports buggy, I guess. And then we would use that until it was kind of dangerous to ride in because we wasn't able to afford a new one, but we saved our money and finally bought us at the Katie's Hardware in Katie's, we bought us a new buggy with rubber tires and a top and paid $125 for it. That was the price of things at that time. And of course then from on after we years later we bought us an automobile in 1924, and then in 1930 we bought us another new one that was called the Model A in 1930, and our first car though was just a little
roadster,
one-seated roadster, and had one door. But then of course from time to time we've bought new cars all along from that time since then.
Do you think you were ever any more proud of any of them than you were that buggy?
Never was any proud of any of them than we was that $125 buggy, because we'd stinted and saved our money to buy to get that $125 to pay for it. My oldest sister, she was a Miss Star Thomas too, and she had several children. I believe this the one we kept was the 5th child, and she had this one baby, and then it was just 13 months old, and of course we took.
She had a little girl who was just 13 months old when she
13
had
months
the baby.
old, and then we took the one that was 13, that was born before that. No?
You took the 13 months old one home with you
we
because it
brought
was
the
a new
13
baby.
months home with us to raise because my sister had so many to take care of. And, of course, I was just 8 years old at that time. And my mother would want us to me and my sister to wash the diapers, and of course we didn't like that very much, but she'd tell us if we didn't wash the diapers, she'd send the baby home. And of course we was glad to wash them then so we could keep the baby. And
she really was like a little sister to you.
Yeah, she was more like a sister to me than her mother was, because her mother was married before I was born, and she lived with my parents then till she was 13 years old.
When she was 13?
When she was 13 years old, of course, she went home with my mother, went home to my sisters. They were, several members of the family was down with typhoid fever. And they didn't have screens, or of course the flies were terrible. And one of the children died with that fever.
And Grandma went and stayed there to wait on them.
And my mother went there and stayed to help take care of them all that time. But she never did take the fever, and of course never did have it. But I think all the members of that my sister's family had it, except the mother and daddy. Now I think that's right.
Well, didn't this child that your parents reared, didn't she get real sick with it too?
She was just didn't think she would live. Even her jaws locked. She was so thin.
Uh-huh. Well, typhoid fever in those days was a terrible thing to encounter, wasn't it?
There were just so many. My mother always thought to come near starving to death and dying because they never fed them like they do in the later years when I had it.
And it was a little difficult for her to wait on that many sick people too.
Yes. And with about our lights now, everybody, as we did, used coal oil lamps up until 1946 is when we first got electricity. And of course that was very exciting. And when they come and wired our house, we flipped our switches up and down so much that we didn't know where there's on and off until when they did connect the electricity, every light in the house came on. And of course that was exciting. And we didn't get a refrigerator then until after we couldn't find one until after we got electricity. And of course we was mighty proud of that. And then a washing machine. I had used a board and tub, washing board and a tub until we got electricity, and I got me a electric washing machine, which I was mighty proud of. And now we have an automatic washer, which is even better. We got
Start again.
Before we got electricity, of course I used an iron just to put a quilt on the table most times, and would iron with just a smoothing iron. But
And how'd you heat that iron?
And we'd heat it on the stove or set it down on the hearth with a wood fire. And then after we got electricity, of course, we got an electric iron, and that was mighty nice and lots easier to do the work than having to heat it by the fire or on the stove.
I'm sure it was much more comfortable in the summer too, wasn't it?
So much more, yes. We get off and we'd either have to have a real hot stove or build a fire in the fireplace to heat our irons until we did get electricity.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the youngest of 9 children, and my parents are Miles and Henrietta Bridges Sumner. And I didn't attend, is that right? I didn't attend the Thomas and Bridges reunion, which they have in Trigg County, have now for 7 years, I believe. But my son had been ill, and I wasn't able to attend at that time. But if I had been there, I would have been the oldest Bridges member in Trigg County. Is that right?
Yes, and you probably would have gotten the prize because you were a few years older than the lady who got it.
I'm about 6 years older, 5.
She was 78,
Yes,
I
I'm
do
6
believe.
years older than the oldest member.
Of course, I know among the Bridges family, you're considered one of the older members of the Trigg County Bridgeses. Ain't that when you all went places when you were young visiting? How did the people entertain you?
Well, we young folks would have play parties, and
Tell us about play parties.
of course, some it's just like that. Some dancing, people call it dancing now, but we called it play parties, and instead of playing by music, we played by singing. We'd sing Skip the Maloo and just old songs like that. And of course then we would have what they call the old-time moonlights, and we'd have the lights in the yard, pretty Chinese lanterns in the yard to light the yard, and of course we would, crowds would gather at the same place and have seats made out in the yard to sit on. And
now that would be a summertime event,
that would
right?
be the summertime, and then these play parties would be in the wintertime. Don't you do a child? People didn't have hospitals, or they didn't run to the doctor every time they had a pain. But my mother used to put mutton tallow on our chest when we'd have a bad cold, and of course if you had a pain in the chest, she'd or put mustard plasters and give us all castor oil sometimes. Pour a spoonful of castor oil in a cup of coffee.
Did you ever give him calomel?
Yes, I guess I have taken calomel. I can't remember for sure, but I'm sure I have. But that's the way we doctored in my young days, because we didn't have many doctors in Trigg County at that time. And of course we wasn't able to afford one, only when we absolutely had to. And the way we cleaned our teeth when I was a child, we would get us a switch off a black gum bush and cut us a little piece and chew the end of it and make a brush to rub our teeth with. And we'd use soda or salt, or some people use soda off the back of the chimney to rub their teeth with. Of course that was in years ago. People didn't have the toothbrushes like we do today. Now, toothpaste, I didn't know anything about toothpaste when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
When I was young, we didn't have rakes to rake yards with, like our lawn mowers. We just we'd go to we would cut buck bushes and make us a broom out of it and sweep our yards with it. And every Saturday then we'd have to sweep around our doors in the same manner.
That didn't give the grass much chance
No,
to
we
grow,
didn't.
did it?
Of course, it kept the grass from growing around our door because we'd sweep so much. Though we usually swept around our doors with an old house broom, and that would come near getting all the dirt than the bug bush brooms would. The first I remember of getting mail was the carrier rode a horse and carried just a sack on his shoulder, and we'd go from Cadiz to Linton. And we didn't have a place to get our mail near our home, but we'd walk to one of the neighbors' house about maybe a mile, no telling, to get our mail, though people didn't get lots of mail then like they do now. But we finally put a box on the main road near our home where it was more convenient to get the mail. Past 4 different pairs of people have lived there.
Family.
Yes, families, And they were Mr. William Crute and Mr. Walter Wills. So Mr. Wills' wife was a daughter of Mr. Crute. And then the Barnett boys lived there. Mr. Smoot Barnett and Crinch Barnett lived there. They were brothers. And then Mr. Walter Mitchell and his family, and Mr. Frank Meredith and his family lived there. And Ms. Meredith and Ms. Mitchell were sisters. And then after the Merediths moved away, Mr. Mitchell and his family lived on there. I don't know just how long, though. And of course then when Alf married, he and Nell lived in part of the house, and me and Stark lived in the other part.
Now, Alf was Stark's brother, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, and we lived together that way for 20 months. And is that right? Back when I was young, Eula, that my sister and me used to, of course our daddy was old, and we would get, and as I said, my daddy would bring up the wood in poles, and we would get out there and chop our wood, and fill our fireplace in where we young folks stayed, and so we'd be ready to start a fire on Saturday night, and then we'd chop enough wood to put a pile in the corner so we'd have enough to last over the weekend.
You knew there wouldn't be any use for fire in there
No,
until from
we never-
weekend to weekend.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's been a joy, and it's refreshed my memories so much, and to get to tell this for things that I hadn't thought of for a long time. So I hope it won't be too rambling, and somebody will enjoy listening to it.
Okay, thank you, Matt.